until someone described it as being like raising a Chow in Sonic Adventure. Then my view on Pearly changed radically. While Pearly has some design issues, I would like to see them get more support, and maybe even expand further on the memory gimmick. Like Chows from Sonic, it'd be funny to see the Pearlies take on the shape of other characters in the game. That could either be the cast of the animes, or somewhat of a meta take on resembling bosses of archetypes that could synergize with Pearly. Like a twisted, evil Dark World Pearly. Just whatever they do, don't make the support a dementia wave. While Pearly is one of the first Xyz archetypes to draw eyes to Xyz without monsters as soul materials, there were archetypes with a similar design that people overlooked. Time Thief is an archetype that revolves around time, past, present, and future. This is represented through gameplay and the areas they attach material from, the grave being the past, the field the present, and the deck the future. Their Xyz denote gaining additional effects based on the card types attached to them as material, with Redoer being the star of the show. Time Thief's going to get a video of its own one day, so for now I'll just talk about Redoer himself since he's the core of their identity. During the standby phase, he rips a card off the top of your opponent's deck and attaches it as material. You can detach materials from him and apply effects depending on the card types you detach. If you detach a monster, he can banish himself until the end phase. He'll almost always have a monster attached to material, and since he attaches a card from your opponent's deck at standby, and monsters are the most common type, he'll likely always have this effect online. If you detach a spell card, you can draw a card. Simple and solid. If you detach a trap, he has non-targeting, non-destruction removal. All of these effects make him an absolute menace in lower-powered formats. But in the context of the main game, he's just chillin'. Tier played him. Sometimes, but that's about it. He's not bad, but he certainly isn't a first draft in a rank 4 call. More recently, Materiactor went
they're
from
playing really low to the ground here.
A dedicated rank 3 strategy that expands on the usage of materials. Like Time Thief, they intend to make their Xyz the traditional way, then attach spell traps through other means. The melt spells all stack your deck and provide a way to attach the top card to an Xyz. The Xyz have effects to return materials attached to them to hand, allowing you to recur materials by design, something that most Xyz decks don't usually bother with. Annulus is a card that makes this dynamic very interesting. Since you can put spell traps underneath the Materiactor, this can functionally be a roundabout way of searching a spell trap. The issue is the melt cards aren't super reliable. Critical involves detaching the card types by providing different effects based on which one you detach. The issue is, once again, the deck isn't too good at letting you get spell traps underneath an Xyz. And unfortunately, Materiactor is a rank 3 deck, and the majority of trap monsters are level 4, so they can't even cash in on those. Materiactor is a really interesting prospect of design, but as it exists now, is a bit of a letdown. So, we've talked about cards that use spells and traps as material. What could be crazier than using spells and traps as materials? Well, using more than 2 monsters, of course. Yeah, it turns out converting 3 or more cards to 1 isn't a very economical decision. Very few times have 3 or more material Xyz been playable, and the few times they were was with Shockmaster and Rongo cards that were completely degenerate. There have been 3 Mat Xyz worth playing that aren't degenerate, although they still highlight a separate issue with the matter. While there can be a balance in power level for ones that require 3 materials, they have another uphill battle to contend with. 3 or more materials brings us back to the dilemma of cards that exist solely as Xyz material, requiring 3 monsters that function for no other purpose but to be shoved under an Xyz. Tiller Knights are one of the most historically competent Xyz decks, even including their 3 mats. However, you still hear the archetype regarded with derision for being boring, since they just spam out guys without any real gameplay nuance involved in between that. Ryzeal is a modern meta Xyz strategy with a lot of the same complaints, having all their main deck names designed with the sole purpose of loading the board for Xyz. And well, when they used 3 Mat Xyz, we return to the other concern. With Synchros, because of how they functioned, requiring more than 2 materials was a process of threading a needle. Xyz only have to deal with the basic concern of getting the correct number of bodies on field, something that doesn't require as much deliberation. This leaves these sorts of XEs to be rather boring and dull in execution most of the time. Konami has started to implement cards that can be treated as more than one material for a 3-mat, but this skirts around the design nuance concern. Most cards that require 3 or more materials aren't even intended to be made properly, as they're rank-ups or evolutions of a 2-mat XEs, with most of them being near or entirely impossible to summon. I know you can technically properly make these, but God did not intend for you to do that. So the few that actually do want you to have to be more creative in design, and sadly, that's lacking. Alloversion is perhaps one of the only really creative uses of multi-mat XEs, being an XEs that has a different effect for how many materials you detach from it. If you detach 2, which you normally will be, you can search a math map, making the card good in its native archetype with the least materials for the easiest turnaround. If you can manage 3 materials though, you can search any level 4, and if you can get 4, you can search any spell trap in the game, effectively acknowledging the issues with multi-mat XEs and providing strong effects in the case you can manage more. Unlike Rongo and Shockmaster, instead of outright floodgating your opponent out of the game, Alloversion allowed you the ability to search a pivotal card that may not be archetypal. Of course, Alloversion's effects have never really been used for anything sane, or even good, but I still think it serves as a benchmark for good design on multi-mat XEs. It just needs more experimentation. The worst of 3-mat XEs can be traced down to ranks below 4, cards like Baby Tyragon, Gold Rat, and Shark Caesar. These are cards that, while yes, don't have good effects inherently, also serve to highlight how 3-mat requirements just don't line up with certain levels because they have nowhere near the number of free bodies that 4 has. So this design aspect, that's already on rickety foundation, struggles even more for the underrepresented ranks. This is especially egregious with rank 3s, since Konami thought it'd be cute if the rank of 3 had a sizable portion of XEs that require 3 material. Despite the prospect of an XEs having more material, and therefore more resources for its effects, it feels as though Konami struggles to meaningfully make that connection in their design. There are some, like Lyrilisk Assembled Nightingale, that uses its material count to determine its stats and how many times it can attack, but those feel few and far between. But back onto the more positive design of XE's materials, while there is an inherent concern with materials being designed solely as XE's material, there is another approach to that philosophy that adds far more flavor to their design. These types of monsters are in 2 subcategories that are generally the same. Monsters that provide unique effects to XEs while they're attached to them, and monsters that apply effects to an XEs that is summoned with them. There is a nuance between the two, and we might as well start by highlighting the issue one faces over the other. Suship is one of, if not my favorite XEs archetype, as all of their XEs are designed in a way that nets them unique effects when made with the correct material. Not only does it dissuade making them with more generic material, which thematically could be seen as making your sushi with cheaper alternatives, it encourages you to mix the correct ingredients for the most value out of your XEs, making the perfect dish. The problem though is that the effects apply on summon. So if you attach a material after the fact, they don't gain the effect. And if the application gets negated,
What did they add? I
then
wasn't
they
paying
never
attention.
receive the effects. I feel like Suship is the perfect XEs archetype in design philosophy, since it encourages you to use your resources more thoughtfully than just dumping bodies onto the board. But of course, that's only in the context of the archetype itself, and unfortunately, they only have 3 XEs, and they aren't exactly the best. I'll talk about Suship one day, but for now, that's all that needs to be said about it here. The other type of material bonus effects can be best demonstrated with Zodiac, with each of their main deck names providing different benefits to a Beast Warrior XE that has them as material. Notably, they don't specify the XE has to be a Zodiac, so they can also provide bonuses to generic Beast Warrior XEs, but that's a little too hard to finagle for any fruitful results. The Zodiac that draws attention to the fact they aren't required to be used for the XE summon for the effect to apply is Whiptail, being the only one that allows you to quick effect attach it from hand or field to an XEs. Whiptail gives an XEs that has it as material the ability to banish monsters that it battles, and in the context of Zodiac specifically, is a way to slip 1200 attack under one of their XEs on the fly. It isn't a once per turn either, The only curse, or blessing when we get to a certain card, is that Whiptail is the only zoo that can quick effect attach itself. Personally, I enjoy the idea of attacking with a main deck monster, then slotting them under an Xyz to boost them. It feels like a neat mechanical translation of Synchro's theme of harmony, but for the functionality of Xyz. But, well... There's also an inverse design philosophy that follows the same principle as these two monster types. But instead of placing the bonus on the inherent material names, it's placed on the Xyz itself to correlate with the type of materials it has. Teardrop, the Rika Queen, and Volafurnages are Xyz that, when made with monsters of the same monster type, gain the added benefit that their effects become quick effects, meaning they still have the versatility to be used more generically, but will yield much greater results in archetype. Evolzar Lars is a similar case, but with a different take. Instead of the material type determining the effect's spell speed, it instead determines the number of materials required to attach. And since its effect isn't once per turn, this means it can be applied more than once, provided you're playing it in its intended environment. Super Quartz is an archetype that combines both the importance of names and improved effects based on them being attached. The issue with the deck is that they aren't very good at making Xyz without the field spell. How did this happen twice? It makes the Xyz with just one monster on field. Since none of them share levels, it's hard for them to actually make an Xyz the way God intended. The new support does address this. Zayton actually allows for a way to Xyz summon correctly, but it's the only card of the three to do that. Black Glare creates a roundabout way of Xyz summoning, pitching a card to summon itself, then Xyz summon, and attach a Quant Grave as Xyz material, with the pitch likely determining the Xyz you summon if you don't have other names engraved. Layer 19 is another piece of solid support, but I feel like the deck needs another good name that makes Xyz summon easier to really function. This type of Xyz design really does highlight a good way to balance the genericness of Xyz with the inherent design of the mechanic, while also still making the cards very powerful in their native decks. But now, we might as well talk about the ugly duckling of this philosophy. Odd Eye's Rebellion and Raging introduce a convoluted process with materials, requiring you to Xyz summon them using an Xyz to gain their full effects. Most cards designed like these outright state you can just overlay Xyz, but for these, you have to go through the effort of converting an Xyz rank to a level, and when you consider the fact they wanted you to make them with these cards, Zhang Shang Magician, actual worst card I've ever seen in my life, yeah, these are a little too delirious in design. However, cards that are deliriously opposite direction exist. I'm referring to cards like Dingirsu and Gigantic Sprite. Dingirsu is a powerful rank 8 that you can't make in its native archetype. At least, not in the way the mechanic itself functions. You can slap it on any one Orcust Link monster, sort of defeating the entire purpose of the mechanic by using one material that isn't even a level, but there is contextual info relevant to justify this design. Since it was released during Mask Rule 4, being able to convert a Link into a full-on Xyz was a convenient way to make them easier to actually summon. It's just the fact that it's an Orcust card, and when any two cards was full Orcust combo, this card was a little too generic, and not because it was a generic rank 8. Gigantic Sprite is a more interesting take on Dingirsu, turning every Link 2 into a level 2 for its Xyz summon, requiring you still actually Xyz summon it, but one of the materials can be a Link. It gives an actual connecting thread between the two mechanics, unlike Dingirsu, who was more concerned with skirting around the issue with the rules of the time. The only issue is that you can only really do this sort of thing with the number 2 or 1 with Links, because there's no way you're converting a Link 3 into a level 3. At least, not unless you're doing it for a completely degenerate reason, in which case, the novelty isn't worth it. While I may talk about Dingirsu as being the less inspired of the two, it does still have a design nuance to it that can be replicated. It is a generic rank 8, so the context of being able to slap it on an Orcust Link to more easily make in its native archetype is sound. Just a shame it doesn't really leverage the Xyz mechanic itself in a unique way. I would have liked to have seen it gain benefits based on the Link rating of the Orcust attached to it, making a point of the material used affecting the card uniquely. The Detach Protection effect is there, along with the Attach effect, but it's designed in such a reserved way that it misses the mark in my eyes. Orcust did get support recently, so if they get more, I'd be interested in seeing them expand on Xyz in the deck. Just don't think that's likely.
I didn't know about that effect.
In regards to Xyz materials is tokens, as they can't be used used for Xyz summon. Since tokens disappear when they leave
Does that still count as me having battle?
The overlay network is a fictional area that's not on the field. Tokens can't be used for them. Boy, I sure do love it when the explanation for mechanics boils down to
It does.
Really coherent design structure.
Doesn't matter though.
Mecha Phantom Beast is a token-centric archetype with an Xyz. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure what the thought process here was. They have synchros, which can be made using tokens, but this ain't Sword Soul. What do you think the tuners are in this deck? You need to modulate the main deck.
Yeah, Lyrillus would have been really nice there.
But also use the tokens with one of the tuners to synchro. This is a really cool design gimmick to flex the differences between the two mechanics in one archetype. Just a shame they didn't actually function that way, as the only place you'd be summoning Dracosac was in Dragon. Now that we've finished talking about cards that can't be materials, let's go back to talking about cards.
Maybe I can remove Rose Dragon. I haven't really been using her.
So, as it turns out, you can Xyz summon with Xyz
Man.
in select scenarios. This type of Xyz has a multitude of different variations. We might as well start by talking about the original concept behind this design. Rank Up is a sub-mechanic.
Again, this is mostly for higher ceiling.
With a name like that. You make an Xyz that's one rank higher than an Xyz you control, using that card as material for its summon. Notably, this transfers the materials of the original Xyz over to the new one.
There's nothing Dynamondo can do for us going
as they're either
second that
or
Little Knight already accomplishes, and much more easily.
Cards are what make up the majority of Xyz that require 3 or more materials, as you're not actually intended to make them traditionally. Though it is sort of questionable to even bother in the first place, seeing as most
Dynamondo is mostly used for going first.
While it would have been far too chaotic
to make our end board a little stronger.
Non-anime Xyz, I wish they did give more Xyz rank-ups. They could even take a similar approach that Mega Evolution did in Pokemon, serving as a chance to give old, outdated, bad Xyz a new form that makes them playable. And in the case of a card game, this is way more manageable to balance. The biggest setback in design of rank-up Xyz is that they require a spell referred to as a rank-up magic in order to do so. This means that
and of course we have a terrible going first hand.
To be able to consistently find a way to one in order to do it. Despite it being 2025, not all of them have gotten that far, which is really funny. Consider the fact that Utopia had already figured out the secondary pathing for the sub-mechanic 13 years ago, allowing you to just summon Utopia's CXC over top of him without a rank-up magic, although Utopia isn't free of criticism either. Rank Down is another sub-mechanic that you can perhaps easily infer the functionality of. Utopia is not only the progenitor of this mechanic, but also the only one to use it. Having a rank down spell that only exists to summon one monster. A monster you wouldn't bother summoning in the first place. You can rank down the bigger Utopia Xyz, but you could also just not do that. It's unfortunate that this portion of the mechanic was left as just an anime flash in the pan. It could have been a unique design element for the mechanic to utilize, but oh well, I guess. Despite how long rank-ups have been around, we only have one archetype in the game where the whole game plan is tied to them, that being Raid Raptor. They're an archetype whose theme revolves around rebellion, and uses the fact that they rank up after falling as a means of conveying an undying will for revolution. They're a rank 4 strategy in base, but ascend all the way up to the top. The deck has like 8 different rank-up magics, so it opens up a lot of unique space for how rank-ups are applied. Since beforehand, every existing rank-up was just slap a chaos form on top of a guy. The reason we likely haven't seen much other experimentation with rank-up oriented archetypes is because Xyz Evolution exists. For all intents and purposes, it's just rank up but without the need for a spell card. Of course, some of the most popular examples of these cards are Cyber Dragon Infinity and Beatrice, but their entire archetypes didn't revolve around evolution. It was just a useful bridging tool. And when you consider the fact that it's so easy to pivot into, it's probably
Wait, what? Oh shit. Wait, what? Why are these cards?
The type that kind of revolved around evolution was Trains. Trains are a rank 10 strategy that just get 2 big guys on field and make a huge train. With their 2 picks being an asshole that burns you, it's a soft once per turn by the way, and a giant asshole that can provide quick effect protection. Gustav is responsible for a fair share of FTK shenanigans, whereas Super Dora is actually more of a defensive card to give the deck legs going first without.
Wait, we're already in the Malice format.
If something has one evolution, it's clear they only need the one. You can summon it over any rank 10 machine. I'm glad Super Dimensional Robo Galaxy Destroyer has been included in something. By detaching a material, it gains 2,000 attack and defense, when it already has 4k stats, and can attack monsters for every material still attached to it.
This is Mass Malice.
Killing your opponent if they have more than one monster in attack. And considering Gustav's 2k burn damage, it's likely a guarantee. The real
I was like, Wizard Ignister, alright, sure, whatever.
Evolutions are designed as an important control card or combo piece. The one archetype to use evolution as its main deal is Digital Bug. I mean, there's the Galaxy Cipher cards, but do you really want me to count the weird inbred cousin of Galaxy Eyes? Digital Bug is a rank 3 archetype, but they're designed in such a way that you're meant to keep evolving your bug 2 ranks up by detaching 2 materials. The issue is, when you detach 2 materials from your rank 3 to make the rank 5, you have 1 material on it, so it can't evolve again. The 2 lower end ranks are all designed with effects to attach more materials to them, but these are slow and clunky, even for the time they were made. Even more insulting, Scare Radiator has a detach 2 effect that synergizes with Corbage. But since you've detached 2 for its effect, you can't make Corbage to capitalize on it. It feels as though Konami were scared of an archetype being able to evolve so easily, so they gave them a detach cost to curb them, but didn't realize that
my god, Wizard at Ignister effect. Secret effect, baby. Why would they do that?
See Digital Bug make a comeback at some point, but considering the fact Konami probably doesn't even remember these cards exist, I'm not holding my breath. Xe Devolution is a mechanic? There are cards like Raider's Knight, Salaman Great Blaze Phoenix, and Sixi Nash Knight that are designed with the ability to summon out a lower rank Xyz over top of them, but it's not really concretely defined like Xyz evolution. If anything, I think if Konami isn't going to design an archetype that has rank up and down because of the conflicts with all the spells, designing an Xyz deck that has evolution and devolution to give you branched gameplay sounds very fascinating. It just takes some elaboration on if this is actually a thing or not. Other Xyz that you can slap over top of an Xyz are cards like Downerd and Zeus, with the latter being a card that can be slapped over top of the former. Downerd isn't a particularly good card. However, it's a body to slap over top of a rank 3, which can then have Zeus slapped on top. And since Zeus's main effect pertains to materials, this is her true purpose. Zeus is a card that can go in any Xyz deck and likely will. He's also a good segue into another set of cards. Zodiac is an archetype that makes Xyz with 1 monster and allows for you to summon over top of the Xyz with another Xyz. The only real design limitation being that only 1 copy per name can be included in the stack. This sort of design allowed for the entire archetype to be the deck's full combo regardless of what names you drew, as you could cycle through all of the Xyz and use their effects, which set you up. When you consider the fact this archetype was capable of stacking so many materials onto one body, and the fact they have a direct attacker, you can kind of infer the relation this archetype has with Zeus. I will say, the most evil thing about Zoo is that the deck stole Digital Bug's flow, slapping Xyz over top of one another to cycle effects, and ending on a card that can pop a monster. The only real difference being that Dryden can be drawn naked, so she gets the ability to pick her target instead of being restricted to only destroying the monster with the highest of a stack. Zexal Field is a weird field spell that allows you to attach an Xyz from grave or extra deck to an Xyz when you summon it. Theoretically, this makes it so you can make a rank up the way God did not intend, but still get the original number underneath of it as material. The problem with that, though, is none of the rank ups are worth that effort. You can of course also do this generically. Exosister Magnifica allows you to send back an Xyz attached to them to perform an Xyz summon and transfer all its materials underneath the card you summon. In conjunction with a card like Zexal Field, you can slide an Xyz under them on your turn, then on your opponent's turn, summon. Then when Zexal Field triggers again, you can put an Xyz underneath that summoned monster. This is a very interesting interaction. However, it just isn't, because there's actually nothing remotely fruitful in gameplay that can come from it. You can make General Kaiser this way, you probably won't, but you could. What's more important about Magnifica, though, is its material cost, requiring 2 Xyz in order to summon. That's right, the penultimate iteration of Xyz summoning with Xyz is the one that is literally that statement, although cards like these are few and far between. Magnifica is the only Xyz to do this and not be related directly to the
Don't tell me you have
Zexal
another
anime.
droll.
In Zexal, these Xyz are typically referred to as rank 0.
Or maybe they have the setting
rank 1. Numeron Dragon
for
functions
the delayed
similarly,
chain
but
thingy.
more bizarrely. We just got a new rank 0, and it seems as though this design element is solely reserved to Yuma's cards. Since Magnifica isn't a rank 0, she's a rank 8. Explain. How does 4 plus 4 equal 0 and 8? We also have the opposite end of the spectrum with rank 13s. Until recently, Numeronia was the only rank 13 in the game. This was because it was a rank up of a rank 12, being the final boss monster of Zexal. Raid Raptor would be given a rank 13 of its own, setting out to have an indestructible boss monster that carries out the will of all the Xyz that fell to make it, wiping your opponent's board and then burning them for the sum of all attack stats present, provided it has 3 or more Xyz as material. Then it can detach 3 and add an Xyz stat line onto it, inheriting the will of those who fell in order to bring the game to an end. Or at least it would if you didn't cap out at 7,800. Rank 0 and 13 are very interesting ideas for Xyz decks, but kind of fall flat in execution, with Rebellion Falcon being the only strong entry so far. Utopic Draco Future is a card you can make with Utopic Future. The reason I mentioned UDF first is because it's the better card. Utopic Future exists as another extra deck slot cost for running UDF. The ability to make them generically sounds promising, especially since UDF is an insanely strong card. However, we come to a second layer of the earlier dilemma about material. If you're overlaying 2 Xyz, you're admitting that the Xyz that you used weren't worth leaving on the field, which is a sign that any archetype that would want to make them has a different problem. Zooship is an Xyz archetype that comes to mind in regards to UDF, because all of the Zooship Xyz aren't particularly good. Only one of them has an interactive effect, and even then I use the word interactive loosely, so it serves more as an admission of poor design on any Xyz archetype that actually needs it to fill in for the deck's weaknesses. There's also the fact that you could be making Xyz that provide a purpose for combo, but then serve no real purpose beyond that. This is evident with the Ghost Trick Extra Deck engine that can make it with any 2 level 1s or level 3s. Of course, you could also just make it in the deck that it's actually intended for, and well... couldn't really work it into another section, but I still think it's worth discussing because it's the poster child of the mechanic. Just like Synchron for Synchro and Hero for Fusion, Utopia glows. People got mad at me for my disdain for Synchron. They're going to get mad about me disliking Automat, and they're definitely going to get mad at me about Hero in the Fusion video. The issue isn't that they're protagonist decks, it's in how Konami seems to approach designing protagonist decks. Utopia intends to summon a bunch of Xyz and, surprise surprise, like Synchron, wants you to barf out multiple negates. Once again, not really aiming to do something unique with the mechanic, nor even foster a healthy and defined playstyle. Synchron and Automat are both needlessly convoluted combo decks that have a basic end board, hoping that the act of slapping down 15 Synchros, or in the case of Automat, Xyz down, is enough for your dopamine receptors to explode. Treat your anime nostalgia as though it can be cheaply distributed just as fast food. And some of you stare at this shit like it's a Big Mac. This sort of design doesn't really appeal to the boomer anime fans because it's the type of design they hate, and it doesn't even serve as a good starting point for new players to learn the mechanic. They're entirely relying on you pogging at the billionth summon of Utopic Scrumplore, rather than you actually enjoying any sort of mechanical design or the gameplay loop. Pendant links aren't in this discussion because they won't let you play a single pendulum card nowadays, and because by the game's modern design, you're basically slapping down a billion links no matter what deck you're playing, which only really highlights how cheapened their existence is in these decks, as they're just functionally replicating the worst modern design has to offer with links, but hoping that by printing it with a card print color that doesn't trigger your sensitivity training, you won't go ballistic about how the game was ruined by the biracial cards. Utopia Dragon R is a neat boss monster for Automat on paper. Sadly, there's just an objective, always best option to be summoning off of it. The fact something like Master Key Beetle is being summoned just as often as Golrat from this thing is proof there's a problem. There's not an actual cool gameplay integration of how Yuma used numbers as a situational toolbox. You're just barfing out a negate. Utopia specifically has a payoff, and that's its OTK strategy. While OTK strategies are very limited in how unique they can be, Utopia's appeals to my ape brain in a philosophical way most other OTK strategies don't. What if you don't attack with big number, but attack with bigger number? Truly a deep and complex query that has stumped even the greatest philosophers in history. Utopia's attack negation effect is something you can use to either negate an oncoming attack or your own. Typically the former was used back in the day, since negate attack on a beater was acceptable boss monster design. But negating your own attack wasn't really that good. Because of the window in which you can activate the effect, you couldn't really use it to reactively dodge a sudden troubled battle. There also wasn't a secondary payoff to negating your own attack, at least not without double or nothing, allowing you to attack again, but with doubled stats should your attack have been negated. In an ironic twist, Utopia's worst usage of the effect is the one that aged the best, which is more likely due to the fact that it was an iconic part of the anime. Another facet of Utopia's design ties in with this strategy. You can just slap like 50 different variants of Utopia on top of the original, with the one you can't slap over top of him being the prominent double, allowing you to search double or nothing, slap a Utopia on top of it, then double its attack, letting you double the stats twice function. I like the gameplay versatility of Utopia forms and this OTK payoff, but the fact this sort of design philosophy isn't utilized effectively for the whole strategy really serves as a bummer. There's absolutely something interesting the deck can do mechanically, it's just that they don't really care to flesh it out when you can just bomb it out Hope Harbinger instead.
Huh. This is a main deck code talker. That's pretty cool.
However, a sizable portion of the difference speaks to me because I'm sort of in that camp. As mentioned
Watch,
before,
they're gonna search a Malice card here.
The lack of creativity,
Unless they really are going math mech.
left me uninterested.
Wizard. Okay, it's either they already have their Malice cards and they're just not commenting to it yet, or
For those that do enjoy the mechanic,
this is actually just Cyber Slop because this guy wants to prove a point.
Wield its depth, either in design nuance or in the toolbox nature of rank pools. When it comes to the XCs that people think of when they think of the mechanic, top 3 picks were, in first, Utopia, second, Zeus, and third, Dark Rebellion. Utopia is self-explanatory, she's the main XC from Zexal. It was the first XCs in the game. Zeus is another one that's obvious from a gameplay perspective, as he's a card that can go in any XC's deck, and has had many appearances in the metagame. Dark Rebellion is kind of surprising though. This is an R5 fans only. While Dark Rebellion has the benefit of including the mechanic in his name, he sort of wasn't that good for its time. You can do far better than have a monster's attack with a generic rank 4. But Dark Rebellion
No, this is Math Mech.
is my favorite XCs just because he's so cool. He was also my first XCs that wasn't Burner Visor, so that was a step up. Other than Zeus,
Oh man, you detach too, but you only search one? Power creep is
he's
crazy.
also the most common XCs people see, and it's not very hard to imagine why. He's a card that can be summoned in any XC's deck, period. In select questions where I mention XC's stacking materials, I chose to include options
searching Math Mech Circular.
existence of Zeus.
You don't really need
with
anything
the
more
majority
than that.
of people preferring the option to forego his involvement in
Are they actually gonna go for the other guy?
On the card itself, there's
The level 8 Synchro is only really useful when you're going second.
necessary statement, but a sizable portion also view him as a limitation.
I have no doubt they're playing it, but
regardless of its
they're not gonna go into it here.
Specifically, still rings loud with the context of the other two that made note of Zeus's impact on card design. There are also a decent chunk of people indifferent to Zeus and don't really see an issue one way or the other. Zeus is a card I go back and forth on if I actually like it being legal or not.
I connect. People are actually playing this card.
Card all around, but sometimes the line between a powerful going second tool and a game-breakingly strong card blurs. The deck that first illustrated just how powerful Zeus could be, fittingly, was Zeus. Zodiac's very own design has you stacking multiple guys on top of one another, with one of said guys being a direct attacker, allowing for you to easily fulfill Zeus's summon requirement, all while having a ton of materials. I've played Zoo plenty of times. I could not tell you a single optimal, well thought out line of the deck. I never got competent with it, and I never had to. Because, as it turns out, if you can just very easily make Zeus with 6 materials, you win a lot of games. In this sense, I don't think Zeus is a healthy card. It limits card design for archetypes that load up on materials, as they'll almost always lean into Zeus. And in said decks, it only encourages being worse at the game. Because a monster that can rapid-fire board wipes multiple times in the same chain is absurdly broken. However, there is still nuance to Zeus being balanced in this context. With Zodiac, you're committing a sizable portion of your extra deck to Zeus and all of its materials, meaning that doing so limits what you can run in the extra, and the extra deck is usually far too tight for that sort of commitment. So, realistically, you would just be playing Zodiac itself. There are select decks that don't care too much for their extra deck space, but if you're relying on swinging in with just a Borbo to make a fat Zeus, you're extremely susceptible to any form of interruption. When we leave the context of Zoo and look at decks that stack multiple materials from the main deck, that's when things start to get more iffy. Since there are now less balancing measures to prevent you from making a giant Zeus and rapid-firing your opponent out of the game, the only intrinsic balancing measure left on Zeus in this scenario is that the board wipe applies to both players, potentially preventing you from making a lethal push or building a stronger board to prolong the game, at least not without potentially burning a ton of resources that you probably could have used more effectively. This is the last bastion of a healthy restriction on Zeus, but now as the game leads further and further into insane recursion and one-card combos, the potential risk becomes far less risky. While Zeus can always be made in any Xyz deck for a single board wipe, or maybe 2 if the deck's capable of stacking their Xyz, either by attaching an additional material from the effect, or using a rank up or evolution to give Zeus more juice. It makes the fact that he can fire his effect in response to a negate of the first activation feel satisfying and rewarding, being able to make a card that is guaranteed to level the playing field while still making you work to earn it. In these scenarios, Zeus feels extremely fair, but these aren't often ever. It's why I find it hard to say definitively if I want the card to be legal. I do like Zeus's hidden effect that most people forget about, being able to attach a material to it from hand, deck, or extra if another card you control is destroyed. This effect is a once in a turn. When you consider this effect only triggers from battle destruction and an opponent's effect destruction, it feels kind of pointless. Your opponent blows up a card, you attach a material. Do you think they're gonna do it again? You also had to go to battle already to make Zeus, so it's not even like you could abuse it by crashing monsters to fuel up Zeus. I guess the only concern is that by attaching any card from deck to Zeus, there's something horrifying you could do, but if you cared about that, why would you print the ability to do so on the card in the first place? We would then eventually receive Zeus's arch nemesis, Typhon. You see, his thought-out statement that sounds rational was a trap. You've all been played. This is the worst card ever printed. Typhon prevents you from summoning once he hits the field, so it's an all-in commitment. It requires you use your biggest monster for its summon. While this usually can be worked around, boy oh boy, if it wasn't one of the 50 design restrictions attached to him, I wouldn't bother mentioning it. What does he do? He can bounce 1 card. That's right, while Zeus is a full board wipe, this idiot is a single compulse. Couldn't even bounce the entire board to, I don't know, parallel Zeus's effect. By its own design, you only have 1 material, meaning 1 bounce. And since it's not a quick effect, you can't even use it reactively. It's also a once per turn, because why not? Unlike the idiot who can quick effect activate a board wipe multiple times in the same chain, they couldn't have even given him the ability to bounce more than 1 card provided he had the material. The fact he isn't a quick effect makes me wonder why he even exists. A card that is designed as the last thing you summon can't be used reactively. He can very easily be outed by spells or traps. Hilariously, the one he is, he only negates big monsters. So anything that has less than 3,000 attack can out him as well. Who thought this design made any sense? Zeus is supposed to be the good guy. Typhon is meant to be the bad guy. So tell me why the bad guy obeys every traffic law to the T, while the good guy floors it to a school bus full of children. Typhon's design can best be summed up as measure once, cut 50 times. His floodgate effect and summon condition allude to being intended to address an oppressive board for a low investment, but he also ends your summons for the turn, something that is not remotely low investment. While you can make him as your last summon, you'd have already had to address the board he seems to exist to address.
Oh damn.
You can't
Firewall gets
going
to stay
first, normally, so it's not like his effect being a quick effect would have made him an instant staple in every deck. He has so many design restrictions and a severe lack in power that whatever the intended purpose of the card was, he's entirely lost. It feels like they wanted him to be a staple, but not in every deck, something that is entirely fine and should have been the case. But to do so, they just slapped every restriction that came to mind on it, then made sure the effects weren't remotely strong enough to warrant them. Then just never bothered to workshop which restrictions and what power level were actually crucial to balancing the card.
Oh, you know, I probably should just go for Zeus.
You can only summon him over an Xyz that battled that turn. Why couldn't they have made Typhon the opposite? Why couldn't he have been a guy you summon at the start of the battle phase, forfeiting your battle phase to make a guy that bounces a board and shuts off big monsters? Typhon's design is the opposite to Zeus in every way, seemingly for the sole purpose of making him bad. Rather than designing him as a cool, powerful monster with strong mechanical parallel theming, he's just made worse in every measure possible. As Typhon exists, it literally only counters Zeus. Shutting off monsters with 3,000 or more attack isn't nearly as impactful as it sounds. Not when it's attached to this liability. It doesn't even have the angle of the strong should fear the weak going for it. Typhon could have had a damage calc only attack boost so he can always get over Zeus, highlighting an element of underhanded trickery or hidden power on his part. It also creates a thematic and mechanical opening, lowering his floodgate effect during combat since he becomes a monster with over 3,000 attack, creating a moment of weakness that can be exploited. But if you wanted to avoid the ruling headache of Typhon interacting with buffing himself over 3,000, they could have just given him 3,100 defense. Zeus having insane offensive capabilities, whereas Typhon has near indestructible defense, creating this dynamic of an unstoppable force and an immovable object. But instead, we have a card that feels like it's meant to counter Zeus, but also, because he loses in lore, they had to make sure he can very easily still lose regardless. Lovely. Some people refer to Typhon as the surrender button. That doesn't do it justice. Typhon is the card game equivalent of seppuku. You don't get it, man. Just activate Smile World on your opponent's board with monsters that are all just under 3k, then make Typhon. Solve game state. If Typhon wasn't comparing itself to Zeus directly, it would not be nearly as ridiculed a card as it is.
What the fuck does subtraction
do?
do?
Direct analog to Zeus, bro just looks like the biggest loser in the universe. But he's good in back row decks. Cool. So are all of these. But with two opposite extremes, maybe we could see something more reasonable come out in the middle. I asked if people wanted to see more cards similar in design to Zeus. A strong majority of people said
God
yes,
damn it, I can't read it.
That it's not playable in every Xyz strategy, and a sizable
If it's gonna get rid of Zeus, then we may as well get rid of everything else.
He's a tool for just about every Xyz deck, and while he can be less effective in others, he can lead to Xyz decks feeling a bit samey.
Okay.
As I've illustrated throughout this video, Xyz is a mechanic with a lot of design nuance. There's plenty of ways to leverage that to make more staples for the mechanic, while also ensuring it's not an automatic include in every Xyz strategy. When it comes to favorites, the top 3 Xyz archetypes were Raid Raptor in first, Sharks in second, and Pearly in third. Raid Raptor is an archetype that's very cool thematically and utilizes the rank up mechanic to fit its theme perfectly. In that regard, I can see why Raid Raptor is one of the most popular archetypes. Sharks also makes sense because it's a Zexal anime archetype with a lot of tools. Namely, Bahamut that would summon Toad to give them a negate, although Bahamut's gone now, so that's out the window. But of course, that isn't the only thing going on with the deck. Pearly was a meta-relevant archetype for a long time, and like Raid Raptors, used the mechanic in a unique way to fit its themes. It also helped that the deck just let you draw a ton of cards. And as always, you could print a card that literally kills you if you use it, but if it says you get to draw a card on it, people will play it. So when it doesn't do that part, people love it even more. With favorite archetypal Xyz, the top 3 were Time Thief Redoer in first, Cyber Dragon Infinity in second, and Teardrop the Rika Queen In third, Redoer is pretty self-explanatory. It's a
I'm
rank
dead.
4 with unique and interesting design, introducing a
We all
useful
know what's
utility
coming
and
out of
unique
this.
gimmick to gameplay. Cyber Dragon Infinity is just a negate. And as you'll realize with a lot of these picks, anything that's generically good, such as a negate or floodgates, will end up as a popular favorite as well as a popular hate, because no one can come to a consensus on the concept of respecting game design. Teardrop I mentioned earlier being one of the XEs that you can make generically.
If they summoned the Synchro 8, they could've just killed me.
Better, provided you have a plan as material. I have a soft spot for archetypes that use tributing as a means of plussing.
Hold on, let him cook, let him cook. I'm sure they can still kill me here.
Use tributing as a means of removal. I
mean, sure. That gets, access code talker, I guess.
So, I might as well include the hated generics in the
gonna
same
be,
breath,
like, I
as
don't
they're
know.
damn near identical. Zeus,
Okay,
Meduska, Dweller, and Typhon all show up in both sides of the top 5.
So they
And very
kill her,
hilariously,
and
the
then
top
that's...
3s are identical.
Yeah, I think that's enough.
Zeus in first, Magoo in second,
Wait,
and
what?
Dweller in third. The only difference in the top 5 is that enough people still have scars from Calamity to remember hating Typhon.
Holy shit!
Silent on, hilariously, second place was technically Redoer, but he's archetyped.
That works too! Holy shit, I've never seen this card.
People forget he actually has an archetype. The contention of these cards is pretty understandable. Zeus is a little too all-encompassing of the mechanic and powerful. I've already gone into detail about how he does sort of limit design as well. So I see Zeus as being the one that's most understandable as polarizing. Meduska and Dweller, though, this is just a case of, it's based when I get to floodgate my opponent. I can see the reasoning, but I would never include them in my favorites simply because their design is intrinsically boring and fails to capitalize on the mechanic's design in a way that feels unique. Well, Meduska sort of gets it right with its concept
Zeus, you
gaming,
cheat out, which isn't fair, but
I'm not giving him a pass.
I like
how
Zeus.
fast the alcohol poisoning acts. When it comes to ranks, we're in a similar situation.
Meduska and Dweller, you summon them fairly, but yeah,
being the second
they're
most
never
liked
really
and
any
most
fun.
hated in the game, with rank 3 fittingly being the third most liked, and rank 7 being the second most hated. 4 being number 1 on both sides once again makes sense. It's the most common and has a rich toolbox in the game, said toolbox having access to cards like Meduska and Dweller, which as we know, are cards hated and liked for their impact on gameplay. It's kinda natural that players resent the most common rank in the game regardless of these cards though, since they will be seeing this pool more than any other. The rank 8 pool is in a similar situation, being one of the more well-developed card pools, while containing negates. Something that isn't exactly a people pleaser when you're staring them down. There's also the fact that Galaxy Eyes is kind of boring. It is just an OTK strategy that isn't very good, and since it's kind of the face of the rank
fuck
pool,
do I do now?
I feel it hampers people's perception of it, especially since the negates are also tied to them. There you go. That's the one mention of the deck in this video. Enjoy it. Probably also doesn't help that they made Gimmick Puppet, the other rank 8 archetype, an FTK strategy. I'm just speedrunning pissing off Zexal fans with this video. What other Zexal archetype haven't I mentioned in negative light yet? Oh right, sharks kind of suck. Although that's more because I just find an archetype based on normal-ass sharks not very interesting visually. You need more stupid shit like Arrow Shark for me to start caring. When it comes to rank 3 and 7's placements, I think it has a lot to do with the recent Xyz archetypes, namely Kashtira and Goblin Bikers. Kashtira is by far the most hated Xyz archetype in the game. Spoilers for the next section. And as a result, it's kind of shed a negative light on the pool as a whole, since cards like Arise Heart, Shangra Era, and Diablosis were doing rather unsavory things in gameplay. There's also potentially scars from the past during Dragon Ruler format. For Goblin Bikers, in relation to 3, people love Gabonga, almost solely for his name alone. Cards like Speedroid Terratop and Takatomborg make for a strong rank 3 engine, so a card like Gabonga makes a lot of these rank 3 engines that didn't have many good payoffs before suddenly more worthwhile. The most hated Xyz archetype is Kashtira, then it's Zoo, and then it's Raid Raptor. Cash needs no further elaboration, but Zoo and Raid Raptor do. Zoo was a tier 0 strategy in its day and has some generally contentious design. It was the first archetype to functionally make every body in the deck full combo, meaning the archetype didn't really have any consistency issues, at a time when most of the game still had some trip-ups when it came to consistency. And when it came to the power of the deck itself, Zoo was in a league of its own. If that wasn't enough to put some people off, they also were just one-card exceeds, which kind of acknowledged the fact that the mechanic often relied on trading multiple monsters as nothing more than material. It felt like cheating and devaluing the mechanic as a whole. Of course, nowadays, I don't even think Zoo is that powerful. Rapier could probably come back to 2 with no real issue. It's another card that has the semi-list type design, and Malicious is currently at 3, so why not? Broad Bull could probably come back and be fine, but that would mean any 2/4s can search out Sangenjin and get the Millennium Engine online. But other than that, who really cares? If anything, I turned fucking French. I think Zoo's more unique design elements age like wine. The ability to make Xyz with other Xyz as material easier than rank ups. The ability to cycle names and effects.
Oh, well that's
it's the
fun.
more interesting parts of the deck that I wish they could expand on. And of course, I'd like to see them do something more interesting that makes Zeus. Because that is probably the most boring element of the deck, and why people still likely have ill feelings towards it. Raid Raptor's inclusion makes sense to me. While I talked about how cool its theming is with rank ups, rising up every time they fall with stronger ranks, embodying an undying will to overthrow the opponent with a rebellion they can't silence. But in actuality, ends up being a tedious combo fest that cycles a million names for the sake of ending on a guy that can't be killed. It's a boring waste of such a cool design theme, and it's certainly a waste of the one archetype in the game that actually makes rank up its entire gimmick. When it comes to the most hated archetypal Xyz, well, first is Arise Heart, second is Kali Yuga, and third is a tie between Rongo and Shangri-Era. Just outside of the top 3 was Noir, and we've already got a gist of what that is, which is also a 7. Doesn't matter, but certainly a funny coincidence. With both Kashtira Xyz ending up in the top 3 hated archetypal, and rank 7 being the most hated, I think that says it all. Kali Yuga is a floodgate. The mercy of his design is that you have to make him with DD monsters. That is, if you're trying to summon him the traditional way. Kali Yuga is one of the poster children for why rank up magic is a little scary if it's too generic. Being able to cheat out Kali Yuga would just unfairly win games, and this card would show up in Raid Raptor. Lovely. And Rongo, who's also here, effectively did the same. Only difference is Rongo didn't need rank ups to be abused. Just decks that could either summon out a trillion 4s, or make Gossip Shadow to get the Floodgate effect online. As I've started to make a habit of, for the state of videos, in the comments I'll have a link to a survey for the next entry pinned down below. Rituals are next up, so I'd appreciate it if you could fill it out and help provide data for the video in the future. Being able to have a physical measure on how people feel about cards helps me form points of discussion and better understand things beyond just my own perspective. So, it's a big help. Springans are an Xyz archetype that defy norms, opting to create their Xyz monsters in reverse. With Gold Golgonda, you can discard a Springan and cheat out a Springan Xyz, with the prime target being Merrymaker, who sends his Springans from deck to grave, and since all the Springans are designed with the ability to attach twin Xyz on field when they're in the grave, they all then hop on his material. Although, Golgonda only lets you do this if you don't control a Springan's Xyz, so it does have to be the first thing you do. You could make more generic Xyz beforehand, but the deck isn't super adept at Xyz summoning the traditional way. Explorer, their rank 8, lets you fire on a zone and blow up cards in adjacent zones for every material you detach for its cost, creating a benefit for stacking materials onto it. Captain Sargus is a card that utilizes the archetype's easy material stacking further.
It's Mitsurugi, let's fucking go, holy shit.
Then destroy a face-up card. The problem is, he's a level 8, and the deck isn't too good at getting him on the field.
They just
also,
have everything
his effect is
already.
only on your opponent's turn, so you can't be of any assistance cracking boards on your turn. Very interestingly though, his Xyz counterpart can destroy or bounce a card if a material is detached.
I guess I'll get rid of the ritual, not that it matters. Again, they already have everything.
You do typically make him over top of Merrymaker. Since he can grab Tally-Ho, you're likely grabbing that so you can actually make another Xyz that'll get his removal effect online. Overall, Springans is an interesting deck that gets a lot of unique design concepts right, yet at the same time it seems to hold back on a lot of the elements that would have let them really shine through. Considering the fact cheating out an Xyz with Golgonda means you can't revive it, and the main deck names don't do a whole lot, the deck feels incomplete. I just hope Konami are aware of that and actually make this deck more than just Tally-Ho Turbo. Suship is a deck that needs more extra deck support and main deck searchers to finally set sail. But other than new support for the deck, it highlights another part of Xyz's design to expand on, designing more Xyz to call for specific names,
Yeah,
but
I
also
actually
provide
should have
trade-offs
expected
for
this.
not having the correct materials. In Suship, it's an incidental benefit if you can make one of the Xyz without Shari, something you likely will almost never be
Right now,
capable of doing, since you can't really assemble the others onto the field without it. If you make any of the Xyz without Shari, the draw effect doesn't count in the application, therefore, it can't get ashed out of applying its effects. I'm pretty certain this wasn't intended nuance in design, but I'd actually like to see it develop
Wanted
into
to
something
destroy
mechanically
myself.
interesting,
God damn it.
rather than unintentionally fortunate. Despite Burning Abyss being as old as it is, it had good design principles that make it still stand out from most Xyz decks even nowadays. While being designed to let you barf any number of names on the field, like most Xyz archetypes, their restrictions forced you to actually think about who you summon, as using their special summon effects would disallow you from using their grave effect that turn. So your normal summon would translate to the effect you want to use that turn. And while by usual means you could activate a detach effect on your opponent's turn to trigger the effect of the other material, Dante didn't allow for this. And the deck's xenophobic design made generic Xyz a risky commitment, since you'd no longer be able to summon BAs while it's on the field. But with Beatrice, you could gain an Xyz with a detach effect on your opponent's turn to use that effect. She'd also pitch a BA from hand and trigger their effect for her summoning.
I need to go get a list of this deck. It's a ritual, of course.
From hand, because you could possibly send them to grave through other means to proc their effects, like the summon of Beatrice, or any number of cards that let you pitch a card for an effect. The deck is designed in a way that allows for it to go all in, but is clearly cognizant that there should be checks and balances that deter you from going too crazy, all while encouraging you to actually think about your plays carefully. It's this sort of design that should be more common and further iterated on with Xyz strategies. Burning Abyss is just a worse Vanquish Soul. I said it, choosing between one of two effects per turn. Inherent design that punishes overextension. A guy that burns your opponent out of games. At least Vanquish Soul isn't xenophobic. In fact, it's inclusive. Not a single same-type monster in this deck. Other than the xenophobia, BA's other issue is that very few of the names are good in the context of going first. And certainly not in the year 2025. They don't have enough cards in Archetype to really leverage using their interactive effects efficiently. While the deck certainly could use new cards of its own, it should let in others as well. Otherwise, it'll always depend on more direct support to keep up with the game. But who knows? Bring the card to fundamentally change how these idiots work, and a card that just changes the card text on Allure Queen. It's been a decade since BA was released. I think we can grow past the bigotry at this point. Exosister is an Xyz archetype that, while it doesn't use named materials, opts to gain effects if made with at least one material from its native archetype. But the most interesting part of their design is that they intend to perform an Xyz summon on your opponent's turn as disruption. This sort of design helps alleviate the issue of game mechanics feeling like they're just spinning their wheels for minutes on end to perform drawn-out combos. The only real issue with this design is that they require your opponent to move a card in the grave for them to trigger, and while that's relatively common nowadays, it's usually pretty easy to avoid, as they're all built like the sheets of paper their game plan was written on. And when they aren't designed to actually get two bodies on field consistently, well, the deck kind of falls apart entirely. Martha would release later and at least give the deck a good means of getting two bodies on field. However, this is too little too late. And the Xenolock wasn't really warranted, especially since she's the only good name in the deck. But with the upcoming Tactical Tri-deck, if the waves of support for the last three are anything to go off of, they're probably going to get support soon. Hopefully more ways to Xyz on your opponent's turn, or a set of cards you give to your opponent to trigger them. The only real concern being maybe making the tactic spells a little too good for Exosister specifically, as well as the issues that usually come with gifting monsters to your opponent.
Alright, I didn't have a second.
Ranks,
guys, Eclipse Twins wasn't going to do anything to begin with.
Deck that helps flesh out the rank 1 pool. Mimigul is also a flip deck designed to give its monsters to your opponent and provide benefits to you when your opponent flips them. The deck is very weak stat-wise, and since you give them to your opponent, that can be a benefit. The deck is kind of underwhelming as it is now, but if they receive future support, or Konami actually builds up the rank 1 pool, I can see them cropping back up again one day. The only real annoying thing about them is their name. Bro, They just made a Pokemon called Gimmighoul. You can't be doing this. Reactor is currently the only dedicated rank 3 strategy, and I love its usage of vanilla monsters and its material gimmick. Right now, it's hard to actually call it an archetype, as it's just 4 main deck names and a couple spell traps that aren't super good at doing the thing they're intending to do. I really do like the design gimmick of recycling your materials back to hand and hope to see it explored even further, as using Xyz materials beyond just making an Xyz monster makes the mechanic more engaging and interesting. It's sort of hard to design decks solely as an Xyz only strategy without a restriction to it, as links have been and continue to be a prevalent part of the functionality of decks. But even ignoring links, blocking archetypes to Xyz only limits what these archetypes can do as a whole. So we're well past the point of every Xyz archetype being purely built around the mechanic. I just hope this isn't used as an excuse to slack off on expanding rank pools that need it. Goblin Bikers are up there with Suship as one of my favorite Xyz archetypes in the game, and that's because they take a unique approach to the mechanic and their design. Although I enjoy design like Suship's that has the names of the materials mattering, Goblin Biker takes a different approach to the mechanic that makes great use of the functionality of Xyz material, opting to use Xyz material in general as a means of resource management for the archetype. Each of the main deck 3s all have the ability to special themselves by yoinking an Xyz material off the field, and since they don't specify the Xyz material has to be underneath your own monster, they can rip off materials from an opponent's Xyz as well. When you consider the fact Ryzeal, currently the best deck in the game, is an Xyz strategy, this archetype has an inherent advantage interacting with them even winning against them in OYCS. I don't care about the mementos. Doug and Gabonga carried. This element of design to Goblin Bikers is also reminiscent of a biker gang, gathering around someone who's entered their turf, surrounding them for riding up in their territory with a cheap set of wheels. I also like Gabonga's design, being removal that triggers whenever an Xyz material is detached.
There's no way of winning with the surrender.
But it is funny to consider it only really exists as a means to trigger Gabonga's absorption effect. A lot of old Zexal era cards were designed in a way indicative of the time.
Yeah, pure Ryzeal isn't making it anywhere anymore.
Mechanic. Of course, not every deck
I had to try it though.
So these tend to be useless. So, seeing an archetype like Goblin Biker that is an Xyz deck that has the flexibility to counter other Xyz decks is refreshing design to see. I also appreciate that Goblin Biker decided to include the non-biker goblins for some reason. Usually archetypes like these that use a moniker that applies to other generic cards goes through the rigmarole of including the text except for blank, etc. This is why they showed up alongside Momentum, but it's also just generally funny to think of the old level 4 goblins being recruited into their ranks. Just look at the goblin attack force, and tell me the image of them all rolling up on Harleys doesn't go hard. Why is the female goblin called Mean Merciless? Sexist much, Konami? Or is there something else you have to tell us? Speaking of bad bitches, K9 is a new Xyz archetype that actually chooses to cover one of the most underdeveloped ranks in thought. 2 of their main deck monsters are designed to interact with hand traps and grave effects, which are near unavoidable in the modern game. Izuna works similarly to how Havnis did for Tyr. They chose the approach of starting your game plan on your opponent's turn as an interruption, rather than trying to prevent your opponent from playing entirely. Just like Havnis, Izuna is the only turn 0 card in the archetype, so it does rely on drawing her. While Izuna's Xyz counterpart Ripper is a negate of the effect types that summoned Izuna, you have to let a card go through first to make it, so you're likely going to be negating a card of lesser value, meaning your opponent is likely to still be able to play if they played their cards right, which is more nuanced design balance than negates typically get. Lupus is the other card designed like her, but that requires Izuna herself to set him up. He can perform an Xyz summon on your opponent's turn, which I always appreciate seeing. However, the context for doing so is either dependent on you opening Izuna to bin him, if you're going second, or you choosing to leave material on the field to do it later, because you can't Xyz summon a card with just him. Or can you? Yeah, so you can just make Typhon on your opponent's turn. I'm gonna be real with you, I still don't think it's worth it. For one, all you get out of that is a negate for 3k idiots, and for 2, K9 wants to summon on your opponent's turn. Good cards, even. So it doesn't seem like a sound decision. Werewolf is a boss monster after my own heart. They printed multi-attacking on him, That's all they had to do. And it's based on the number of materials attached to him. Just like Ripper, he has an effect that interacts with hand traps and grave effects, with the effect in question depending on whose turn it is. During your turn, he banishes a card from your opponent's field and a card from their grave. If it's your opponent's turn, he hand rips while providing hand knowledge. I'm not a fan of hand ripping, but once again, the design isn't intending for you to get to him immediately to punish your opponent for interacting in general. While I still don't like the principle, I appreciate the versatility and effects based on the turn player, while requiring setup to get to. Generator can make Werewolf though. Well, if they could actually make Xyz, well, they could. You may now take into account this is a rank 9 in a rank 5 strategy. Lupus's intended rank 5 is less impressive. He has protection the turn you summoned, and gains 500 attack every time your opponent activates a monster effect. But then, during the standby phase, he can banish a card. That's it. He's not bad, he's just not doing a whole lot. But since the deck has its own mask change, it doesn't really matter if he's not the best, as he can just be used as a pivoting point for the deck. I will say, the one disappointment with K9 is that they chose to just copy mask change for the deck. I would have liked to have seen it be more of a hybrid between mask change and rank up magic, giving their Xyz more effects if you make them with the mask change. K9 still leans into the issues with higher level Xyz decks. While you can summon them easier than the average 5, Konami still seems to be terrified of a level 5 that outclasses Cyber Dragon, making them all dependent on your opponent having 2 or more cards in hand to normal them without tribute. I would like to remind everyone they printed the Bestials. Is the level 6 the difference? You can't power creep Cyber Dragon with another level 5. Is that the issue? You know, I can see the case for the hand cost because Werewolf hand rips, so there's a motivation not to hand rip your opponent. But if you're going second, better hope your opponent didn't play their whole hand when you clearly didn't open Izuna. Yokel and Lantern are your other 5s, and they can special summon, but Yokel's also the only one that can do so without setup. Hopefully we see more in the future, but regardless, I still love the archetype's design and hope Konami keeps up the pace and makes more archetypes for the ranks that they've left to rot. Pearly is one of the only decks to stack a bunch of materials as a game plan. It felt as though after Zeus and Zoo's interaction, Konami was hesitant to explore this type of design again, but I'm glad to see it come back in such a unique way. While I can't say I care much for making a big unaffected idiot as a game plan, I do appreciate the playstyle of the memories, giving your Pearly more effects to utilize. And since they would let you draw cards, and people will literally, metaphorically shoot themselves just for the chance to draw a card, it scratched an itch for many players. While Zodiac doesn't come up much anymore, I still think it's worth evaluating the power of being able to make an Xyz with just one card. Cards like Puppet Shark and Xyz Poseidon Splash are very interesting prospects, but of course, are traps. There's also Dimension Slice that lets you use it immediately if you Xyz summon, but that's not very good. There are just so many Xyz related cards that I think this ability to make an Xyz with one monster will unlock a fun sandbox at some point. Another facet of design that I'd like to see explored is using Xyz evolution for more abstract goals. In Duel Links, I found playing with Mech Knights extremely fun, and not because of their intended playstyle. Mech Knight is an archetype that gives you the ability to summon their monsters to a column that is occupied by 2 or more cards. This sort of design is bad in the context of going first, but one of the ways to work around it, that wasn't the skill that just gave your opponent a card, was to make an extra deck monster, then set a back row in the same column to get you off to the races. Since the archetype has 6s and 8s, you could tribute summon a 6 over a card occupying a zone another Mech Knight could be special to, then you could overlay your 6s or 8s into an Xyz and put them in the EMZ. For a 6, you could make Exabeetle, who puts a card in a back row column to further help get out Mech Knights. Then, you could make Rhinoceros over top of it and move it to the other EMZ to convert that zone into a Mech Knight column. And with 8s, you could do this with Prime Photon and Full Armor. It was extremely fun to utilize evolutions to further combos for the deck and gave more weight to the mechanic as a whole, all while giving the deck a unique flavor with its ability to combo. I want to see an archetype that taps into this sort of design and really makes good use of it. When it comes to Xyz approaching Xyz material differently, while Gabunga slurps up a single monster on field, Levitain can tag into Jormungandr and attach cards from either field or graveyard to it as material, with the number of cards being equal to how many materials it had attached to it when it was tributed, giving a really powerful payoff to an Xyz made with more than 2 materials, while also still being really good with just 2. It's just a shame it's cards of rank 9, so it's not exactly easy to make use of that flexibility, even in its native archetype. Really want to see more Xyz that make use of absorbing monsters as material as a form of unique removal, since you kinda get to hold your opponent's cards hostage without destroying them or setting up any grave or banishment effects. It's a wholly unique interaction that provides a type of removal no other mechanic can. Armored Fortress creates a mini-engine for rank 3 and 4s to use. It can also bridge into Dark Lancer and use the equipping of the related Xyz cards as a form of removal. While you can make Dark Lancer with any 5 or 6, it's clear you're going to make him with Fortress or any of the Shark cards, because he isn't much use to rank 5 or 6 strategies, at least not unless they develop other ways to equip on your opponent's turn. So I hope there can be more engine bridges for these higher ranks, especially since 4s aren't the pool hurting for them. Ryzeal is the latest rank 4 archetype, being one of, if not the best decks in the game currently, and making great use of the existing rank 4 pool. Very intelligent and brave design to make the archetype lock into rank 4s. Wouldn't want anything interesting to be possible. Thankfully, the TCG has finally banned Dweller to curb the less savory part of their playability. But of course, Ryzeal's own cards are still responsible for its success, with Detonator as its strongest asset, being a 2-mana Xyz that's functionally a 3-mana by grabbing another material from grave. Detonator can pop a card by detaching a material when your opponent activates a card or effect, mercifully choosing to spare us from a negation boss monster, because they put it on the field spell for some reason. Detonator can also detach for protection of your Xyz, with both detach effects not being limited to turn, but just how many materials it has that it can detach. Duo Drive is a hell of a card. It's extremely funny that it's not even seen as a card that searches 2 cards, but rather a card that eats a negate, since your opponent can't afford to let you functionally resolve a Pot of Greed with crafted draws. I'm not sure how I feel about a card being designed to eat negates, considering the scenario where it doesn't means you get insane card value that isn't remotely fair. I do like that Detonator and the field spell use their materials as general resources for their game plan, but find the field spell's usage of doing so uninspired. Despite the fact the deck is dominating the meta, it feels incomplete. It's just a powerful and consistent deck, even in its current state. It just feels as though it's lacking more depth to its material management, and if anything, that's what I want to see expanded upon in the deck. An Xyz archetype that dominated the game at one point in its history that I think is worth revisiting is Windup. Interesting thing about Windup to me is the level modulation alongside the rank 3s and the 1 of 4 and 5. I think it'd be a great idea to pivot the archetype to being a rank up and down archetype. They have the capacity to make them all naturally, but it'd be interesting to see them use the sub-mechanics to more flexibly make them. Even potentially get more benefits with Xyz underneath them. They could just make a new archetype for this, but I think it'd be nice to bring Windup with this since the groundwork is already there. In my video on Battle and Boxer, in regards to their 3-mat, I came up with the idea of a card that would summon out every other copy of a Boxer you had on field and make the 3-mat Xyz. It doesn't outright invalidate the 3-mat cost, like cards like Drake Shark, but finds a way to make them easier to summon in archetype, giving the archetype itself a payoff to running them, since the Xyz still typically want to be able to use all 3 materials for effect cost. This design deters generic abuse, but still allows for generic cards to synergize in scenarios where it's relevant, all while actually making the card worth playing. I want to see approaches similar to this taken for 3-mana Xyz, because as they are now, they feel pointless if the only means of addressing it is cards that narrow the material cost by 1. Despite Xyz being a mechanic plagued with the most consistently lazy design, it's perhaps one of the most unique mechanics in the game. It has so much potential to be explored even now. There's so many layers to their design that it leaves room for so much experimentation and design creativity. I can only hope that Konami continues to expand on the more recent excursions of the mechanic, as they've made them exceed the limitations of their predecessors.
Main event. I really don't know how to feel about Dominus Impulse alongside every other hand trap. People like running. I don't think side decking these kinds of blowouts are worth it. One thing I know for sure is I definitely need to adjust this deck, cause this ain't good enough. Chaos Hunter's a nice backup for when we can't Lancia anymore. Roll is still good. Nobody bothers with TB anymore. I don't know, I kinda want to still run it, just so we can trigger this effect in a mirror matchup, potentially, I don't know. It's not worth it. I really shouldn't. Just realized that we can't really play Effect Veiler either. Not a fan of this list. Hand traps that are turned off when we activate Dominus Impulse. Bualos, Meowls, Lancia, and Droll. And honestly, not enough replacements for them. More accurate to say, there really isn't any. I'll go see what other people slot in as non-engine, but for now, I have no choice but to do this. I wish Dominus Impulse wasn't so good. Hmm. That still sucks a lot of balls. Didn't mean to put that in attack. Not much to side deck here, huh? Throwing lock's kinda useless. Now let's go Solemn Strike. Game could slow enough to a crawl where that can still provide some value. Pretty good. Let's see it. I need them to make the first move. They can't transaction roll back anymore.
Negative vitality, superficiality, spread denies my personality. Oh boy, not again. Came back again with a plot against me. You must wanna get tossed again. Truth be told, your mission aboard again. Never lose my mind's locked tight like Tokyo grip, like concentrated. Be careful when I'm agitated. Better back up, the attack, so I can. Don't let anyone mislead you like you were nobody. 'Cause we so much to me. Let them laugh at you.
Wait, I forgot about Superstar Slayer. Shit. They're definitely just gonna go into Superstar Slayer. What the fuck? That's certainly a tech.
Since school days, it's real life. Realize that there ain't no textbook to your life. It's that you gotta write your own manuals to your life. I did it my way, switching 4 lanes on the highway. Fast and furious, the image I display. They can't wait to obey my style. Society needs to be systematic, well calculated. It's mathematics, but can't prevent me from being charismatic. While I'm at it, my shit's automatic. They wanna delete my existence.
I would have Star Slayered.
I'm a dot to the middle distance, can't never catch me, stop me. Don't let anyone mislead you like you were nobody. 'Cause we're so much to me. Let them laugh at you. They see at the end of the day, who's gonna be smiling? Being different from others is not cute. It's okay.
Yeah, I better get used to playing this deck, cause this is gonna be what I'm taking to Platinum, to the top ranks. So long, Drytron. You were fun while you lasted. You all were. I'm thinking if I want to play Drytron in the higher levels, I just main deck Lancia. All 3 copies of it. Of course, there is the problem of Mitsurugi still being a thing. I will be playing it. However, something I begrudgingly had to accept about myself is that rituals as a mechanic isn't actually something I enjoy as much as I thought I did. It wasn't so much that ritual was fun. It was more so that I just really liked Ruin, Queen of Oblivion. And you know how strong she is. Even the fact that I fell in love with her because the stupid DS games are as ball-sackingly easy as they were. Shows a lot, I suppose. And in World Champion 2008, there was one deck that was really fucking atrocious to play against, and that was the guy that played Gravekeepers. Goes to show how powerful that archetype was. Anyway, I'm just gonna fucking put in one of everything here for now. I don't think I'll be making my own list. People have already made lists that are better. All I really have to do is copy-paste those for the most part. Aw man, I can't have unknown arts as my thumbnail. I guess we can go for the ritual spell. Obviously no tournament decks for me to mooch off of yet. But soon enough I should find some good deck lists that isn't this hot garbage pile that I cooked up. Because this is hot garbage, in my opinion. You can't convince me. You can't possibly tell me that this is a good list, because this really isn't. This is a really bad list. I need to stop drawing this. Only 18 hand traps, that's not a lot.